All right, today we're going to wind the clock all the way back. I'm talking dial up tones and all. We're going to dig into the story of the internet's very first draft. Its quiet, kind of clunky beginning, and how it made its first really complicated steps into the classroom. I mean, seriously, just try to picture that for a second. A web where you can't comment, you can't like, you can't share, you can't create anything. No social media, no blogs, no reviews, just pages. It sounds completely alien to us now, right? But believe me, that silent one-way street was the reality. And it was the foundation for literally everything that came next.
So yeah, before the web became this giant global conversation, it was basically a massive digital library. This first era, what we're talking about today, was all about a top-down flow of info. You could look, but you definitely couldn't touch.
So how did we even get there? Well, it all started way back with a military project called ARPANET. But the real game changer, the thing that unlocked the internet for you and me, that came decades later. A guy named Sir Tim Berners-Lee over at CERN, he stitched together a few just brilliant ideas, and bam, the World Wide Web was born. And that's what kicked off this whole static web era.
And these were those brilliant ideas he had. Just three simple but totally revolutionary building blocks. You had HTML, which is basically the skeleton that gives a web page its structure. Then there's HTTP. Think of that as the delivery truck moving all the files around. And finally, the URL, which is just the address so you can actually find anything. Put those three things together, and suddenly this super complex network became a place that pretty much anyone could access. So that brings us to what we actually call Web 1.0. The easiest way to think about it, just call it the read-only web. You had a pretty small number of creators, the webmasters, making all the content, and then this huge audience of people who just, consumed it. It was a lot like TV or a newspaper, just a one-way broadcast, but digital. Okay, let's really break down what that read-only experience felt like. First off, pages were static, like completely fixed. Nothing changed unless a webmaster went in and manually rewrote the code, which means info got outdated fast. As for interactivity, you could click a link. That was pretty much it. And finding stuff, you couldn't just Google it. You had to wade through these huge human-edited directories like Yahoo was back in the day. It was this really slow, deliberate process of just consuming. Okay, so picture this thing, this global library just sort of appears out of nowhere. For educators, the question was massive and obvious. What on earth do we do with this? Could this new tool actually change the fundamental mission of teaching? I mean, it was a huge question. Now, what's really interesting is that right when computers started showing up, there was this big shift happening in education anyway. People were moving away from the old model, the sage on the stage, where the teacher just lectures and students passively listen. The new idea was the guide on the side, where the teacher's job was to facilitate the student's own journey of discovery. So, in this new student-centered world, the computer ended up wearing three different hats. First, it could be a tireless tutor, just running students through drills and practice over and over again. Second, it was this incredibly powerful tool, like a word processor and a calculator on steroids. And then, in this really clever twist, the computer could be the 2T, where students actually learned by having to teach the computer how to do things through programming. But it was more than just that. Beyond those specific jobs in the classroom, the computer was also a gateway. All of a sudden, a classroom in the middle of nowhere could tap into these enormous digital libraries. And for the very first time, students could actually talk to experts or other students on the other side of the planet, all through the magic of email. I mean, that was a truly fundamental shift. But, and this is a big but, this is where that really optimistic story kind of hits a brick wall. It turns out you can't just drop a revolutionary new technology into a school and expect a learning utopia to magically appear. In fact, a lot of the time, it just made old inequalities even worse and created a whole bunch of new problems. And this really gets to the heart of the problem. See, the web didn't just connect people. It also immediately drew this sharp line in the sand between the haves and the have-nots. The digital divide, that wasn't some minor side effect. Nope. It was a core, defining consequence of this technology, right from day one. And that is the absolute crucial point here. Look, getting the computer in the door, that was the easy part. Schools were facing a mountain of hurdles. First, you had the digital divide itself, just basic access. Then you had teachers who, bless their hearts, had zero training on how to use these new tools effectively. The infrastructure was spotty at best, and even when everything worked, too often schools just took their old lesson plans and put them on a screen. No real innovation. And layered on top of all of that was the absolutely crushing cost of buying and then maintaining all this new hardware.
You know, it's really easy to look back at Web 1.0 and all these struggles in education and just write it off as a failure. But that's totally missing the point. It wasn't supposed to be the final product. It was the essential, messy, necessary first draft. It was the foundation that our entire digital world is built on today.
And its legacy is just immense. It democratized information on a scale nobody had ever seen before. It literally created the concept of e-commerce. Think about that. For education, it laid the groundwork for distance learning with those first super clunky online syllabi and notes. And maybe the most important thing it did, all of its limitations, the fact that it was so quiet and one way, that created this massive, powerful hunger for something better. It perfectly set the stage for the interactive, social Web 2.0 that we all live in today. And so that leaves us with a question that, honestly, we are still grappling with. Web 1.0 was all about giving people access to information. But did all that access actually create a more knowledgeable world? A world of better learners? Or did it just end up being a shiny new high-tech way to deliver the same old lessons? It's definitely something to think about.